You wake up in a mud brick house on the west bank of the Nile. It is just before sunrise, and your day as an ordinary washer in 18th dynasty Egypt has begun. The air is already warm. You can hear ibis birds in the distance, the honk of a goose, and the rustle of date palm fronds. There are no alarm clocks here, but you don't need one. The rhythm of the Nile, the demands of your household, and the structure of Egyptian life keep you moving. Today, it's laundry day, not an occasion of leisure, but a physically exhausting, essential chore. Your tools are simple: river water, clay basins, ash, natron, and if you're lucky, soapwort. Let's begin by understanding what exactly counts as laundry in ancient Egypt. Clothing in ancient Egypt: sweat, dust, and linen. The climate of Egypt is brutally hot and arid. Clothing, unsurprisingly, is light, breathable, and made from linen crafted from flax that's spun and woven by hand or foot-powered loom. Linen, while elegant in ceremonial depictions, is a practical material. It breathes well and absorbs sweat, but it stains easily, especially in the dusty environment of the Nile Valley. Most people in ancient Egypt wore simple tunics or kilts. Children often wore nothing at all until puberty. Wealthier Egyptians might have pleated garments or dyed fabrics, while farmers and workers stuck with plain, often coarsely woven linen that grew yellowed with age and labor. And here's the important detail: Egyptians deeply valued cleanliness. To be seen wearing stained or dusty clothes was a mark of disorder, impurity, or laziness. Even tomb paintings depict individuals in radiant white linen, a symbol of both spiritual and bodily hygiene. So, laundry was not optional. It was a necessity of daily life, even if it was backbreaking. The washer's work: tools, techniques, and terrain. Your family's laundry will be done by the Nile, like most households. There are no washboards, and detergent doesn't exist in any commercial sense. You begin by gathering the soiled linen, which may have hardened patches of sweat, food, or soot from cooking fires. You place it in a clay basin or bundle it up in woven baskets. You walk to the river's edge, choosing a smooth stone or packed silt bank where the current isn't too fast. If you're lucky, you'll arrive early enough to secure one of the flatter communal stones polished by centuries of use. Washermen and washerwomen congregate here. The work is shared and gossip flows as readily as the river. Who has a new baby? Who's been called to work on the pharaoh's tomb? Who got caught stealing temple bread? You dip the garments in river water, wring them, and begin to scrub, sometimes with your hands, sometimes by beating the cloth against a stone. For stubborn stains, ash is used as an abrasive. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture harvested from dry lake beds, acts as both soap and deodorizer. If you're very fortunate, your family may grow or trade for soapwort, a plant that releases a gentle lather when mashed, highly prized, especially for washing garments worn by scribes or priests. This scrubbing, wringing, and beating process is repeated multiple times, followed by rinsing in fresh water. There is no quick cycle. It's hours of work, often done barefoot under the punishing sun. Cuts from sharp stones, bruised palms, or pulled shoulders are common. And of course, there are the crocodiles. A life by the river: community, risk, and ritual. The Nile is lifeblood, but it's also danger. Children are taught from an early age how to spot crocodile eyes beneath the reeds. Washerwomen, particularly those alone or farther south near Nubia, often wash in groups to deter both animals and unwanted human attention. Still, the river is sacred. Offerings are made to Hapi, god of the inundation, and Taweret, the protective hippo goddess. Before doing laundry, some households make small libations, spilling beer, placing a lotus petal on the water, or whispering a quick prayer. Washing clothes was not just an act of cleanliness. It was spiritual hygiene, a reenactment of renewal. As the Nile floods and recedes, bringing new soil and rebirth to the land, so too are garments cleansed, restored, and made whole. In fact, temple rituals for cleansing statues of gods mirrored daily laundry practices. Priests would wash sacred linens and redress the gods in fresh fabric each day, sometimes multiple times. This cyclical cleansing symbolized cosmic order, known as mad. Drying and storage. Once the linens are clean, they're laid on rocks or stretched across woven mats to dry under the sun. Because of the low humidity, drying is fast. However, wind-blown sand is a problem. So many launderers place smooth stones atop the corners to keep the fabric grounded. Ironing in the modern sense does not exist. Creases are smoothed by hand, sometimes with burnishing tools made from clay or polished wood. Important garments might be folded with reeds to maintain pleats. Finally, clothes are stored in baskets or wooden chests, sometimes scented with crushed myrrh or cedar. If garments belong to a scribe, priest, or noble family, extra care is taken to prevent insects from nesting in the folds. Laundry and status. In royal and elite households, laundry was performed by enslaved laborers or household servants. These were not necessarily low-ranking individuals, as clean garments were crucial for court appearances, rituals, and offerings. A skilled launderer in Pharaoh's palace could rise in prestige, becoming responsible for dressing members of the royal family or even preparing burial wrappings for mummification. In tombs, titles such as Washer of the Linen of the Great House appear on stelae. Their work, though repetitive, was seen as part of the divine service to the gods and the state. Some even left behind miniature models of laundry's wooden figurines depicting tiny washermen scrubbing linen by painted blue streams. These were placed in tombs to ensure the deceased always had clean garments in the afterlife. A slow day's work. As the sun rises higher, your hands sting from the salt and sand. The gossip has quieted. People are lost in the repetition of the task: scrub, rinse, wring, repeat. Children play nearby, splashing in the shallows. A priest walks past, nodding. Someone sings an old hymn in a low, hoarse voice. You wonder briefly how many thousands before you have done this exact work, and how many will do it after. In the great monuments of Egypt, your labor leaves no mark. Yet without it, those monuments and their keepers would have been shrouded in the dust and disorder that the ancient Egyptians feared so deeply. The day is far from over. You still have drying, folding, and storage ahead, and then cooking, and perhaps tomorrow weaving or repairing a tunic torn at the shoulder. But for now, as your fingers find another wrinkle in the wet linen, you can't help but wonder, did even the pharaoh himself ever smell of the river? As the linen dries under the late morning sun and your hands ache from labor, you reflect on something your grandmother once said. Clean clothes are not just for the living. It sounded poetic when you were a child, but now you understand it was not metaphor. It was a cultural truth. In ancient Egypt, laundry was not merely a task for earthly hygiene, it was a fundamental part of ritual purity, deeply tied to religion, death, and the divine. Clean linen surrounded both the body and the soul, and nowhere was this more important than in the preparation for the afterlife. Cleanliness as cosmic order. To the ancient Egyptians, cleanliness was not superficial, it was spiritual. Dirt and disorder were seen as physical manifestations of Isfet, the force of chaos. In contrast, Mad, the central concept in Egyptian philosophy, stood for harmony, truth, and balance. Washing clothes was one small but vital way to restore Mad. Priests bathed multiple times a day and wore nothing but freshly washed linen, never wool. Wool came from animals and was considered unclean in temple contexts. Linen, made from plant fibers, was not only clean, it was pure. This focus on purification extended beyond the individual. Temples were regularly cleaned. Ritual tools were washed. Sacred spaces were swept, scrubbed, and fumigated with incense. Even sacred texts written on papyrus were sometimes wrapped in linen to protect them from corruption. And so it follows that laundry, as mundane as it might seem, was part of the machinery of cosmic order. The temple launderers. Temples in ancient Egypt employed a staff of specialists to handle clothing and textiles used in rituals. Their titles appear in inscriptions, ostraca, pottery shards used as writing surfaces, and tomb walls. The washer of the garments of the god was a real and recognized position. These individuals were tasked with cleaning and maintaining the priestly garments and the cloths used to dress statues of deities. Egyptian gods were treated as living beings. Their statues were woken in the morning, bathed, dressed, perfumed, and fed with offerings. This elaborate ritual, called the opening of the mouth when performed for the dead, had its everyday version in temple routines. The linen used in these acts was sacred. Each wash was done with care. The garments could not be soiled, frayed, or crumpled. And after these garments wore out, they were sometimes burned, buried, or repurposed in burials. One papyrus from Deir el-Medina records the delivery of 10 lengths of temple linen to the washerman, followed by 10 new tunics for the high priest. These weren't casual errands. They were logistically important, recorded in writing, and linked to ritual obligations. Laundry and the afterlife. But linen's role was not limited to temples. It accompanied the dead on their journey to the next world. When a person died, they were carefully washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in linen bandages. The wealthier the deceased, the more layers of linen were used, sometimes hundreds of meters in length. The linen itself often came from reused household garments, temple cloth, or ritual tunics. Linen was so valuable that even wealthy individuals recycled old textiles for their burials. In fact, modern archaeologists often find shrouds with traces of previous stitching, dyes, or laundry marks. Some even bear names of the original owners scribbled in ink or pigment to keep track of whose linen was whose. Laundry marks, small symbols or hieroglyphs, helped identify garments within households or temples. These could be owner names, numbers, or simple geometric signs. The presence of such marks on funerary wrappings tells us that laundry systems were not only organized, but tracked. It also tells us that even in death, a clean shroud mattered. The art of folding and pleating. Washing was only the beginning. Egyptians had specific ways of folding, pleating, and preparing linen for wear and burial. Pleated garments, common among nobility, were often created by folding wet linen and pressing it under weighted boards or winding it around rods. This process could take hours. The effect, pleats that radiated like sunbeams, was a visual expression of status and refinement. In temple and funeral contexts, folded cloth was symbolic. Amulets were often wrapped in precise layers within the bandages of mummies, and certain sacred knots, such as the Isis knot, were tied into shrouds. Some garments were folded in such a way that they referenced protective deities or sacred geometry. Again, laundry was not just maintenance, it was metaphysics. Washing for the gods, dressing the divine. Consider the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, a vast complex teeming with stone, light, and silence. Here, linen was as sacred as the hieroglyphs chiseled into the walls. Each day, the statue of Amun was washed, dressed in clean linen, and offered food and incense. This ritual was conducted out of view of the public by high-ranking priests, but the linen they used, the white strips, tunics, sashes, came from the hands of launderers who never stepped into the inner sanctuary. These workers existed at the edge of the sacred, their labor essential but unseen. Yet, without their wash basins, without their sun-bleached drying mats, the rituals could not proceed. One could argue that the gods were clothed by the hands of washermen. Evidence in the archaeological record. Archaeologists have found extensive evidence of laundry-related practices, particularly in worker villages like Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the Valley of the Kings. Among the discoveries: stone basins built into floors for washing, worn linen fragments with ink inscriptions, laundry lists on ostraca with counts of cloth items, tools for wringing or burnishing linen. These were not tools of luxury. They were everyday items, used by men and women who scrubbed, rinsed, and folded not for glory, but for survival. In some tombs, laundry-related items were buried with the dead, signaling their profession, their pride, or perhaps their hope for cleanliness in eternity. Class, gender, and the division of labor. Laundry was often women's work, but not exclusively. In elite households, enslaved men might perform the washing. In temples, both men and women could be tasked with cleaning ritual cloth. Some scholars suggest that priests in training began with laundry duties to learn discipline and purification. There were no machines, no division of dry and wet work as in modern laundries, but there was hierarchy. Inscriptions refer to supervisors of the linen stores, overseers of washermen, and even clerks of laundry lists. These were literate individuals who managed cloth inventories vital in temples with hundreds of priests and daily garment rotations. And of course, there were the unseen workers, those whose names were never written, whose backs bent under the sun, whose arms plunged into river water year after year. They didn't write the history, but they wore it, washed it, and folded it into the story of Egypt. A pause in the work. You sit now under the shade of an acacia tree, watching the linen flutter like pale birds on the line. The sun has passed its peak. The day feels long. The water, once cool, has warmed to body temperature. Children nap. Old women pick fleas from the hems. The reeds rustle. You wonder, did the gods ever notice the smell of fresh linen? Or was it the act of cleaning itself, the endless rhythm of order over chaos, that pleased them most? The final rinse of the day is always slower. The sun has lowered, your arms are tired, and the light turns golden across the Nile. As you wring out one last tunic, its folds clinging to your calloused fingers, you might not realize you're part of something larger than mere laundry. But in fact, you are. What seems like a simple act, soaking linen, scrubbing out sweat, drying it in the wind, is one of the fundamental engines behind ancient Egyptian life. Cleanliness was not an accessory of society. It was its foundation. Let's explore how something as repetitive and mundane as laundry quietly shaped the economic, spiritual, and political workings of one of history's most iconic civilizations. Linen, Egypt's quiet currency. While Egypt is often remembered for its gold, grain, and stone, linen was its daily currency figuratively, and sometimes literally. Flax, the source of linen, was one of the most widely cultivated crops. From the lush delta to the southern cataracts, its blue flowers signaled more than beauty. They marked survival. Flax was hardy, fast-growing, and suitable for large-scale production. Once harvested, it was soaked, retted, dried, combed, spun, and woven, tasks performed largely by women in domestic spaces or within organized workshops. Linen could then be used for clothing, wrapping mummies, covering temple statues, trade in kind or exchange, tax payments, offerings to temples, dowries and inheritance. There are records from the Middle Kingdom where linen is used to pay workers' wages, temple dues, and even funeral costs. You might owe one length of good quality linen per season to a local temple or landlord. It was as dependable as coinage. And what happens when that linen gets dirty? It needs to be washed, rewashed, and sometimes ritually purified before it can circulate again. Thus, laundry wasn't a domestic afterthought. It was an essential part of the textile economy. Bureaucracy and the laundry list. The Egyptian state was one of the most administratively advanced of the ancient world. And even in this hierarchy of scribes, clerks, and overseers, laundry had its place. On scraps of limestone or pottery called ostraca, scholars have found evidence of the daily logistics of clothing and cleaning. These are not poetic inscriptions. They are lists. 12 tunics delivered for washing. 2 missing garments presumed worn through. 5 sacred cloths returned to storage. In the temples of Karnak or Luxor, or in artisan communities like Deir el-Medina, such tracking was essential. Garments were expensive. Losing a single shendit kilt might spark an investigation. Sometimes, these records even hint at disputes. One ostrakon details an argument between 2 temple servants over who was responsible for a linen sash that had gone missing, suggesting that laundry errors had professional consequences. In this way, laundry intersected with record-keeping, accountability, and administration. The state expected clothes to be tracked like grain or livestock. Clean garments were not just personal, they were public assets. Laundry as labor and social identity. Though rarely depicted in temple reliefs or tomb walls, laundry was a labor performed across class boundaries. But how you did it, and for whom, said much about your place in the world. For the working poor, laundry was manual, communal, and repetitive. A task performed by mothers, daughters, sometimes sons. You washed your family's clothes, your neighbors', or bartered with others for a service in kind, perhaps a bundle of lentils or dried fish. For temple laundresses or male washermen in royal households, the labor was more specialized. You answered to an overseer. You managed sacred textiles. You might be illiterate but highly trained, knowing which garments required special handling or purification. And then there were enslaved workers and servants whose lives were dominated by such chores. Their labor was essential but invisible, rarely recorded except in inventory or property lists. In death, tomb models of washing scenes were common, tiny figurines beating linen beside miniature rivers. These weren't just artistic. They were spiritual insurance policies. The elite wanted their clothes washed in the afterlife, too. Odor, purity, and the scented world. Ancient Egypt was not without smells. With open latrines, hot bodies, and livestock underfoot, the urban centers, especially Memphis and Thebes, were pungent environments. Clean clothes, then, were not only visual symbols. They smelled different. Freshly washed linen was sometimes scented with oils or incense. Wealthy Egyptians owned cedarwood chests for clothing, which protected garments and infused them with fragrance. Perfumed cones worn on the head during feasts and funerals might have also scented clothing by melting slowly under the heat. Recipes for pleasant-smelling linen oil appear on medical papyri, often involving myrrh, frankincense, lotus extract, or honey. There's something almost modern about this. Think of how we associate the smell of laundry soap or sun-dried sheets with comfort, cleanliness, and home. The ancient Egyptians did too. And yet this too was hierarchical. The working poor didn't scent their clothes. Theirs were worn and scrubbed until the fibers frayed. But the principle remained: clean linen marked one's alignment with order, while dirty garments suggested decay. The symbolic end: linen in death. When a person died, all the mundane rules of linen were amplified. The deceased was to be wrapped, layer by layer, in clean cloths. But more than just covering the body, this process created a new form, a sacred being. Mummies weren't just corpses. They were spiritual vessels, designed to survive judgment and transition to eternity. High-status individuals were wrapped with precision, sometimes with amulets placed strategically among the folds. The Book of the Dead even includes spells to protect specific layers of linen. It's believed that each wrap was accompanied by a spoken incantation, turning the act of wrapping into a ritual language. The laundry done in life became a spiritual language in death. The cloth that once clung to a sweaty back in summer, scrubbed by river stones, was now the fabric of immortality. Laundry as a microcosm of Egypt. So now we see it clearly. Laundry, which seems at first glance a dull, repetitive, unremarkable activity, was actually a microcosm of Egyptian civilization. It reflected spiritual beliefs, purity, ritual. Social order, who washed, who wore, who watched. Economic reality, linen as trade, tax, inheritance. Administrative control, lists, logs, inventory systems. Symbolism in death, wrappings, folds, transitions. We rarely hear about the woman who scrubbed a priest's robe or the enslaved man who rinsed out a pharaoh's sash. But without them, the rituals would not have happened. The gods would not have been clothed. The dead would not have been wrapped. And perhaps that's the quiet triumph of history, that even the most ordinary gestures, scrubbing, folding, drying, are stitched into the very garments of culture. The last fold. As the final garments are gathered from the rocks and shaken free of sand, you tie them into a bundle. You hoist it on your shoulder, wet patches soaking through. You begin the walk back through the dust, past reed huts, past merchants packing up for the evening. In the distance, a temple bell rings. Somewhere a scribe is still working by lamplight, and on the horizon the river glints. You don't get a monument. You don't write your name on temple walls, but your hands have helped preserve order. You have participated in mad, not with speeches or battles, but with water, sun, and cloth. And as the sky darkens and the mosquitoes rise, you ask yourself, is it possible that the soul, too, must be laundered before it can rest? You are seated at a narrow wooden desk inside a high-ceilinged room with stone walls. The air smells faintly of ink, wax, and old parchment. The only sounds are the scratch of quills and the occasional sigh of a fellow clerk. Welcome to the tabularium, the central records office of ancient Rome. You are a census clerk, a low-ranking but indispensable cog in the administrative machinery of the Roman Empire. Your work is tedious, repetitive, and largely unseen by the public. And yet, it shapes the very structure of Roman society. Every tax paid, soldier enlisted, and land boundary drawn passes first through your ink-stained hands. Let's explore the unnoticed world of the Roman census, and its clerks, those quiet record-keepers who upheld an empire. The Roman census, counting more than just people. When most people hear census, they think of a population count. And yes, that's part of it, but in Rome, the census was far more than head counting. It was an instrument of control, taxation, and social organization. Conducted every 5 years, known as a lustrum, the census listed every adult male citizen, his property, his dependents, wife, children, slaves, his occupation, his military eligibility, his tribal affiliation. It wasn't just about who you were. It was about what you owned, what you owed, and where you stood in Rome's rigid social hierarchy. The purpose: to assign each citizen to a class for voting, military service, and taxation. Wealth, not birth, largely defined your status, and the census clerks, the humble scribby like yourself, were the ones who recorded it all. Who were the census clerks? Census clerks were not senators or orators. You weren't famous. You were likely born into a family of equestrian or freedman status, educated enough to read and write, but not powerful enough to make laws. You may have been a slave of the state, a servus publicus, working not for a private master but for the Roman government. Some clerks earned their freedom through years of loyal service, rising to the coveted rank of scriba, a lifelong government position with relative job security. Cicero once called scribi the archivists of the Republic, and not without reason. These clerks preserved the institutional memory of Rome. While politicians came and went, scribes remained. Your tools, simple but effective. A stylus for wax tablets. A quill or reed pen for ink on parchment. Small clay seals or tags for marking documents. A wax tablet for rough notes. And most crucially, a mind trained in monotony. A day in the tabularium. The tabularium was located at the base of the Capitoline Hill, overlooking the Roman Forum. Its thick stone walls housed the archives of the Republic decrees, laws, contracts, treaties, and of course, census records. You arrived at dawn, not because you were particularly zealous, but because light was precious. Oil lamps were expensive, and natural sunlight filtering through narrow windows was your best friend. Each day you copied, reviewed, or compiled census data, comparing land declarations with tax records, transcribing census oaths, professio, into official ledgers, reviewing birth registrations, flagging discrepancies. Was Lucius really exempt from taxes or just hiding wealth? Updating death notices, which affected family tax liabilities. Lunch was short, usually a piece of bread, some olives, maybe cheese. You ate at your desk. Conversation was rare, mostly limited to groans over particularly faded ink or hard-to-read tablets. And then back to work. Roman timekeeping was imprecise, but your tasks were endless. You didn't stop until your scroll was full or your candle burned too low. The mechanics of record keeping. Your workspace included not just the writing desk, but also wax tablets for temporary notes, papyrus scrolls for permanent records, chests archi filled with previous census documents, tally stones for counting entries, catalogs, indices to keep records searchable. Scrolls were labeled with clay tags, stored in shelves or niches, and cross-referenced by region, class, or census year. Some were stored off-site, in archives like those of the Aerarium Public Treasury. Your job wasn't just writing, it was organizing. You were part librarian, part accountant, part bureaucrat. And once every 5 years during the official census, your workload quadrupled. The ritual of the lustrum. At the heart of the Roman census was not just data, it was ritual. The process culminated in a sacred ceremony called the lustratio, where the censors purified the citizen body. From your position, you wouldn't witness the lustration directly, you'd be too busy finishing the records it was based on. But you knew its importance. The censors, elected officials, would preside over the field of Mars. Citizens marched before them, declaring their property and family. Sacrifices were made. Lists were confirmed. Penalties were assessed for dishonesty. And once it was over, your copies became law. What you had transcribed became the basis for tax rolls, military levies, and political representation. In that way, your ink was more powerful than the sword. Bureaucratic frustrations. Of course, it wasn't always smooth. Ancient Roman bureaucracy was a tangled web. Problems you faced regularly included illegible handwriting from provincial scribes, faded ink on reused papyrus, conflicting data from family members trying to cheat taxes, scrolls chewed by rodents or damaged by mildew, missing reports from distant provinces. Sometimes you wrote notes of frustration in the margins. One real example from Vindolanda, a Roman fort in Britain, reads, "I cannot make sense of this cursed list. Who gave it to me?" You weren't alone. The power of quiet labor. Despite the monotony, your work was crucial. Without your daily grind, the Roman Empire could not collect taxes, assign military duties, or enforce property law. You might not be remembered in marble, but your handwriting, your careful copies of census rolls outlived emperors. In fact, many surviving inscriptions on tombstones or tablets today reflect your work. Census data was often inscribed on monuments, such as Marcus Aurelius, son of Gaius, registered in the census of 128 AD. Declared property, 23 jugera of farmland, 12 slaves, 3 oxen. These lines, carved in stone, began at desks just like yours. A moment of stillness. As the sun dips behind the Capitoline, you set down your stylus. Your fingers are cramped. The wax tablet before you shows a faint outline of today's tasks. Outside, the sounds of the forum rise, vendors packing up, children chasing each other through colonnades, priests muttering evening prayers. You sit for just a moment longer, staring at the fading light. No one will thank you, few know your name. But somewhere in a distant province, a soldier's pay is being issued because you correctly tallied his father's assets. Somewhere else, a farmer will not be unjustly taxed, thanks to your precise record keeping. Somewhere, an orphan's guardianship is legally protected by the census notice you filed this morning. And as you blow out the oil lamp and shut the ledger, you wonder, did Rome ever realize how much of its power rested in silence and ink? The days blur together inside the tabularium. There are no public feasts for clerks, no statues raised to honor those who count the citizens, measure the fields, and reconcile the tax rolls. Yet your work underpins everything the empire claims to be. In this section, we'll look deeper at how the Roman census wasn't just about population, it was a tool of governance, social engineering, and imperial cohesion. You, as a clerk in this system, sit at the intersection of data and dominion. The Roman Empire may have marched on legions, but it was organized by ledgers. The census and social class, fixing the Roman order. Rome was a stratified society, and the census made those divisions official. When citizens appeared before the censors, the magistrates who supervised the census, they weren't just listing their property. They were being placed into a class which determined how much tax they paid, what kind of military service they owed, what voting bloc they belonged to, whether they could run for office. There were 5 main property classes. Senatorial class, the elite landowners with wealth over 1 million sesterces. Equestrian class, wealthy but not senators often involved in commerce or administration. First to fifth classes, descending tiers based on property and income, each with specific military roles. You, the clerk, didn't determine class, but you recorded it. Your job was to log, calculate, and cross-reference the declarations. Occasionally, you would spot inconsistencies. A man declares 300 jugera of land, but paid tax on only 185 years ago. A youth claims equestrian status, but has no public record of sufficient property. A freedman lists his sons as dependents, but their birth registrations suggest otherwise. Sometimes your quiet notations would lead to fines, demotions, or public shamming. The census, in that sense, was a tool for moral regulation. Censors could penalize those deemed morally unworthy, stripping citizenship, downgrading status, or banning someone from public office. Even conduct in private life could be punished if discovered during the census process. Unmarried men, unregistered children, or debtors. And you kept the receipts. Taxation, land, and the state's hunger. At its heart, the census fed the empire's voracious appetite for resources. Rome needed money not just for palaces and aqueducts, but for paying soldiers, funding roads and bridges, supporting grain distributions, annona, financing spectacles like gladiator games, subsidizing temples, baths, and public forums. Taxes came in many forms: land tax, poll tax, customs duties, but all of them relied on census records. When someone failed to report land correctly, it was your job to ensure they were tracked. In the provinces, local officials, decurions, depended on data you had compiled back in Rome. Consider the vastness of it. From Britannia to Egypt, from Lusitania to Syria, millions of individuals and properties were tied together by census rolls. And when uprisings occurred, often sparked by tax grievances, it was census-led valuation that had sparked them. In fact, in 6 CE, when Quirinius conducted a census of Judea after Roman annexation, it provoked a rebellion led by Judas of Galilee. To some, the census was not just a tally, but a symbol of domination. Provincial administration, when Rome counts you. As the empire expanded, the census had to adapt. Not everyone in the empire was a citizen. In fact, the majority of the population in the early empire were non-citizens, or peregrinae. Even so, they were counted, taxed, and often regulated through censuses tailored to the provinces. Governors organized local censuses, and data was sent back to Rome reviewed by scribes like you. In Egypt, the household census, letter 1F00 pi omicron gamma rho alpha phi eta, was performed every 14 years, with individuals listing their name, age, occupation, and relationship to the household head. Papyrus records survive, showing how detailed these reports were. These records were written in Greek, not Latin. As a Roman census clerk in the capital, you might receive translated summaries compiled by scribes in Alexandria. You'd extract totals, update demographic rolls, and flag provinces with suspicious drops in taxable population, perhaps due to disease, migration, or underreporting. And always the math had to balance. If Gaul's population grew but its taxes shrank, you knew something was wrong. Life and death in the ledger. Part of your job also involved death records. When a male citizen died, it impacted family tax status, property inheritance, military obligations, electoral representation. Sometimes, a family would delay reporting a death hopping to continue collecting grain allotments or military pensions. You were trained to spot such anomalies. Did the son now claim head of household status? Was a widow now listed as head of property? Were tax payments late? Sometimes, names simply vanished, lost to war, disease, or poor record-keeping. You marked these with small crosses or notations like ignatus, unknown, or non-repertus, not found. To you, it was another line, but to someone else, it was the end of a life's paperwork. The moral weight of ink. The power of the census clerks extended quietly into the lives of ordinary citizens. Your documents shaped who could vote in the comitia centuriata, who was eligible to serve in the Praetorian Guard, who could claim compensation after military service, who could inherit land or serve as a guardian, who qualified for state grain rations. Mistakes were costly. A misname could mean someone lost their vote, their tax exemption, their place in line at the public bath. For this reason, trust in scribes was paramount. Corruption did happen, bribes to alter land totals, erase debts, or hide heirs, but punishments could be severe, especially for freedmen scribes. And while you might never see the face of those you served, their lives every coin paid, every acre farmed, every right enjoyed passed beneath your hand. A bureaucratic empire. Some have argued that what truly distinguished Rome wasn't its legions or laws, but its administrative machinery. The empire had tax registries, citizenship rolls, property records, military enrollment sheets, legal precedent archives, grain distribution ledgers, and the census sat at the center of it all. Even emperors consulted the census before enacting reforms. When Augustus instituted the Lex Julia, promoting marriage and penalizing childlessness, he relied on census data to assess compliance. His tax breaks for large families, based on census reports. Later emperors like Vespasian and Trajan expanded the use of the census to reshape social policy, from encouraging veterans to settle in colonies to enforcing tribute in distant provinces. All of this passed through scribes like you. A break between scrolls. Now, as the sun slants across your desk, your fingers pause above a fresh sheet of papyrus. You've just completed copying the full household record of a wealthy freedman's 6 sons, 3 slaves, 2 homes. You've sealed the document with wax and left your initials in the corner. Your eyes sting from the dust and lamp smoke. You rub your neck. Through the window slit, you hear a flute player somewhere in the forum, followed by a burst of laughter from the street. You allow yourself a moment to stare at the fading light. You think of how the man you just logged may never know you exist, but his tax bill will. His son's inheritance will. His public rights will. And so you ask yourself, if no one remembers the scribe but the scroll survives, have you not still shaped the empire? Even as you finish your final entry of the day, you understand that the information you've written will outlive you. Somewhere down the line, a fellow clerk will copy it, a provincial administrator will cite it, a family will depend on it, a lawsuit may hinge on your careful handwriting. In the Roman world, permanence was not just built from marble or bronze, it was written quietly in ink. In this final section, we'll explore how the Roman census and the scribes who made it possible left behind a bureaucratic legacy that influenced centuries of governance, reshaped legal systems, and laid the foundation for our own modern obsession with paperwork and record-keeping. Because in the end, the greatest empire in the ancient West was maintained not by emperors alone, but by its filing cabinets. The census in the age of empire. By the 2nd century CE, under emperors like Hadrian and Antoninus Pius, the Roman census was fully integrated into the empire's administrative rhythm. It wasn't just a Roman Republic custom anymore, it was an imperial institution. Provincial governors sent detailed census reports back to Rome, updating on agricultural production, birth and death rates, slave ownership, military-aged male populations, tribal and ethnic distributions. Each province, depending on local conditions, adjusted the census to fit the culture. In Egypt, as we saw, the census was conducted every 14 years. In Gaul, it followed Roman models but incorporated native clan structures. In Judea, it triggered revolts due to its associations with Roman control. You, the Roman scribe, had to harmonize it all, translating, copying, and adjusting records that might have originated in Latin, Greek, Aramaic, or local dialects. Some scrolls arrived months late, others never, but when they did arrive, it was your job to read them, to absorb entire provinces into a system built by your ink. And when things didn't align, missing taxes, irregular population counts, unexplained emigration, you filed notes, sent queries, or issued flags to superiors. Not flashy work, but fundamental. Scribe and the Eternal Office. Clerks were not always invisible. Over time, the scribe, particularly those who worked in high-ranking offices like the Aerarium Saturni, public treasury, became powerful in their own right. Some gained influence by controlling access to financial records or legal documents. Others amassed knowledge that even senators lacked. By the imperial period, some scribe were wealthy freedmen, entrusted with keys to Rome's institutional memory. Epigraphic evidence tells us about Gaius Julius Herma, scriba librarius, who donated funds to his community. Lucius Pompeius Anicetus, a record-keeper whose tombstone praises his diligence. Quintus Lollius Urbicus, a former clerk who rose to become a provincial governor. Clerical work in time became a career ladder, a bureaucratic cursus honorum that mirrored the political one. While the elite scorned paper pushers, they also depended on them. A senator might boast of military valor, but when he needed to prove his estate's tax exemption, he came to you. From Rome to Byzantium, bureaucracy endures. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, much of Roman military and political structure collapsed, but its bureaucracy survived. In the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, censuses continued and scribes remained essential. Imperial edicts from Constantinople still relied on census rolls. Land tax registers, known as cadastica, were direct descendants of Roman census forms. Even as languages changed from Latin to Greek, the habit of meticulous record-keeping persisted. Byzantine emperors used censuses to recruit soldiers from landowning peasants. Tax collectors relied on archived land assessments that had Roman roots. Monasteries maintained detailed census-style roll of their tenants and donors. The ink of Roman scribes had not only recorded the empire, it had outlived it. Echoes in medieval and modern bureaucracy. The medieval church, inheriting Roman administrative models, kept similar structures. Parish rolls replaced the census in tracking populations. Tithe records echoed Roman tax registers. Monastic scribes, often former Roman civil servants or trained in their tradition, maintained the paperwork of kingdoms. Fast forward to early modern Europe, and the influence is unmistakable. The Domesday Book of 1086 in England, an exhaustive land survey ordered by William the Conqueror, was a Roman census in spirit, if not name. Napoleonic France revived census taking as a tool of social engineering and military efficiency. The United States Constitution mandates a census every 10 years, an idea rooted not in Enlightenment rationalism alone, but in Roman precedent. Wherever a government wants to count its people, levy taxes, or distribute power, it channels the Roman clerk's quiet legacy. The human cost of counting. Of course, bureaucracy is never neutral. For many under Roman rule, the census meant surveillance, extraction, and domination. It brought taxes to the poor, forced labor to the provinces, and legal limitations to those without full citizenship. Being counted could mean losing property, being conscripted into the army, being eligible for new taxes, being denied rights as a non-citizen. The scribes, while not lawmakers, were complicit in the system. Your quill did not kill, but it conscripted, it condemned, it taxed, it drew boundaries between those inside and outside the law. Even today, censuses provoke suspicion, resistance, and fear in many parts of the world, reminders that counting is not always benevolent. The scribe's afterlife. Your life as a Roman census clerk will likely end without monuments or parades, but your scrolls may survive longer than temples. In some distant century, a fragment of papyrus with your handwriting may sit in a museum behind glass, labeled with an impersonal tag. Census Register, ca. 124 CE, scribe unknown. But in that faint, neat script is the echo of your breath, the quiet scratching of your reed pen, the moment of pause before you wrote a name you could not pronounce. You recorded the lives of others, but who, you wonder, will record yours? Final reflections. Rome built in ink. Now, as you file away your day's work and extinguish your lamp, the city outside bustles with senators, shopkeepers, and soldiers. Rome lives in its monuments, but it runs on its records. The census you maintain may never be remembered in triumphal arches, but it is encoded into the empire's very bones. Who owns land? Who pays tribute? Who marches to war? Who marries? Who inherits? Without your efforts, those systems fall apart. The emperor may be divine, but the tax collector still needs the right forms. And so, as you leave the tabularium and descend the stone steps into twilight, you murmur the same question you asked 5 years ago, and 5 before that. What empire endures, if no one remembers the names of the counted? You sit on a low wooden bench in a small timber-framed cottage somewhere in 13th century England. The air smells faintly of smoke and earth, with hints of dried rosemary and thyme hanging above the hearth. A jug of ale rests on a table nearby, and on the shelf beside the bread and salt lies something unexpected. A chewing stick, its end frayed from regular use. Welcome to a lesser-known part of medieval life, oral hygiene. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people didn't simply let their teeth rot in their heads. Dental care existed, albeit without dentistry as we know it today. Cleaning one's teeth was part of daily and spiritual life, performed with natural materials, herbal concoctions, and homegrown routines passed down through generations. Let's begin our journey into the surprisingly rich world of medieval tooth care. The teeth of time, what do we actually know? Before we look at what medieval people did to clean their teeth, let's examine how we know they did it at all. Much of what we understand comes from archaeological evidence, skeletal remains showing patterns of tooth wear, decay, and tartar buildup, medieval manuscripts, medical texts, monastic records, and herbal guides, monastic rulebooks, which occasionally mention grooming habits, household accounts and trade logs, indicating the purchase of herbs, cloths, and spices. And while the dental condition of medieval populations varied depending on class, diet, and location, many skulls from the early and high Middle Ages show surprisingly good teeth, especially among peasants. Why? Because sugar, the primary enemy of modern teeth, was virtually unknown in most of medieval Europe until the late Middle Ages, and even then, it was rare and expensive. The daily routine, cleaning without brushes. There were no toothbrushes as we know them, no fluoride, no dental floss. But that doesn't mean teeth were neglected. A chewing stick, also known as a miswak in some Islamic cultures, was used in many parts of medieval Europe. These were small twigs, often from aromatic or fibrous trees like hazel, willow, ash, apple. One end was chewed until it became fibrous like a brush. The other end might be carved to a point for picking between teeth. People used these twigs to scrub their teeth, often in the morning and before bed. While no formal brushing twice a day rule existed, regular cleaning was embedded in personal and spiritual routines, especially for monks and those who followed strict rulebooks like the Rule of St. Benedict. Tooth powders and pastes, a medieval mouthwash of sorts. In wealthier households or monasteries, tooth powders were made from ingredients like crushed salt, burnt rosemary or mint, powdered sage or iris root, ground charcoal or ash, crushed oyster shells or bones. These powders were either rubbed onto the teeth with a cloth or added to the end of a stick. Some recipes from Islamic medical texts, which influenced European medicine via Spain and Sicily, included myrrh, cinnamon, or honey. Here's an example from a 12th century manuscript attributed to the Trotula, a set of women's medical texts. Take burnt salt, powder of mint and sage, and the ash of vine wood. Mix with honey and rub the teeth gently to make them white and the breath sweet. Interestingly, honey, often thought of as harmful to teeth today, was sometimes used to bind powders or flavor herbal concoctions. But it was also used sparingly, and its antibacterial properties may have offset some risks. Flossing and toothpicks. Toothpicks were common, not made of plastic, of course, but carved from wood, bone, or even quills. Some high-status individuals carried personal grooming sets complete with combs, tweezers, and toothpicks tucked into pouches or hung from belts. In some monastic communities, there's evidence that thread or horsehair was used to pick between teeth, although whether this qualifies as floss is debatable. Public decorum dictated that toothpicking should be discreet. Etiquette books warned against baring one's teeth in company or picking, like a savage dog at supper. Still, the tools were there, and people used them. Rinses and fresheners, medieval mouthwash. Oral rinsing was encouraged, particularly among clergy and nobles. Common rinses included salt water, wine mixed with herbs, vinegar diluted with water and sage, infusions of mint, thyme, or hyssop. Many rinses were designed not just for hygiene but for fresh breath. Halitosis was socially frowned upon, especially in courtly settings. Chewing cloves or cardamom was also common, especially among merchants or clerics who spoke frequently in public. Monks might chew fennel or parsley between services, not just to clean the mouth, but to maintain purity during the chanting of prayers. Diet and its dental effects. One reason many medieval peasants had better teeth than expected was their diet. A typical peasant diet included coarse bread made from stone-ground grains, vegetables like onions, leeks, cabbage, pulses, lentils, peas, occasional cheese or eggs, rare meat or fish. The coarse nature of this food actually cleaned the teeth as it was chewed, and without processed sugar, tooth decay was lower, especially in early medieval periods. However, by the late Middle Ages, sugar and dried fruits began appearing in upper-class diets. With them came tooth decay, especially among the nobility. Ironically, it was the wealthy who had more access to cleaning tools who began to suffer worse teeth first. Dental problems and remedies. What happened when something went wrong? There were no dentists in the modern sense, but there were barber surgeons, monks, herbalists, and wise women who treated tooth pain. Treatments included applying clove oil for pain relief, packing the gum with burnt onion or garlic paste, cauterizing the jaw with hot metal to kill infection, using leeches to draw inflammation, and as a last resort, tooth extraction, usually without anesthetic. Tooth pulling was done with pliers or fingers. It was agonizing, sometimes fatal if infection followed. There were no antibiotics. Some texts recommend strange remedies like breathe the smoke of burning henbane seeds to drive the tooth worm from the mouth. Yes, tooth worms a common belief at the time. People thought small creatures inside the teeth caused decay and pain. The methods may have been painful and based on poor science, but they reveal the medieval commitment to trying to alleviate pain, to maintain dignity, to stay clean in a harsh world. Cleanliness as a spiritual virtue. In the monastic world, cleanliness had a moral dimension. The rule of Saint Benedict encouraged bodily cleanliness as a form of humility and discipline. Washing the hands, face, and teeth was part of preparing for prayer, meals, and community. Some abbeys even set aside specific days for grooming, including trimming nails and brushing teeth. Clean breath was linked with pure prayer. A clean body reflected a clean soul. And for the laity, too, being presentable in church on feast days, at confession often included washing one's face and mouth. The tools may have been rustic, but the intention was meaningful. The last brush of the day. As the sun sets over the thatched rooftops of the village, a woman sits by her hearth and chews the end of a hazel twig. She spits into the fire, wipes her lips, and lays the twig beside her cup. Tomorrow, she'll burn a little rosemary and rub some ash into her teeth. She doesn't know the word hygiene, but she knows what it means to feel clean, to smell fresh, to face the day with confidence. And as she murmurs her evening prayers, she wonders, do angels notice bad breath? The fire has burned low. Across Europe, from monasteries to manor houses, village cottages to city courts, people prepare for bed, sometimes with a prayer, sometimes with ale, sometimes with a few extra strokes of a cloth across their teeth. But just as clothes, food, and language differed between nobles, clergy, and peasants, so too did dental care. In this section, we explore how oral hygiene and dental routines varied across social class, geography, and religion in the medieval world. Who had the cleanest teeth? Who had access to better tools? And who was left to suffer in silence? The answers, like the surviving tooth marks in pewter cups and bone combs, are buried in the dull but revealing details. The teeth of kings, hygiene at court. Let's begin with the nobility. Contrary to myth, medieval elites did not revel in filth. In fact, personal cleanliness, especially among courtly aristocracy, was highly valued. Royal households often employed physicians, apothecaries, and barber surgeons, who advised on all forms of bodily care. These advisors prescribed not just remedies for pain, but preventive routines. For example, Charlemagne was said to rinse his mouth with water and wine after meals. Isabella of Castile reportedly owned tooth-cleaning cloths scented with cloves and cinnamon. A leaner of Aquitaine's court popularized perfumes and scented oils, including those used for breath. Medieval noblewomen kept small personal grooming kits including tweezers, mirrors, and picks. These were stored in ivory cases or worn on belts as delicate nécessaires. Archaeological digs have found these sets in elite burials across France, Germany, and England. But with wealth came risk. The elite consumed soft bread made from bolted white flour, candied fruits and dates, wine, mead, and ale often sweetened, meat-heavy diets leading to less chewing abrasion. These soft, sweetened foods contributed to higher rates of decay, even as their owners had better means of cleaning. In essence, the nobility had worse teeth but better tools to hide it. Clergy and monks, cleanliness, silence, and salves. Monasteries were hubs of knowledge and ritual. Within their walls, health was considered both spiritual discipline and bodily stewardship. Rules varied between orders, but many monastic communities observed regular grooming days, tonsurings, beard trimmings, nail clippings, and yes, oral cleaning. Some examples. Cistercian monks practiced rigorous hygiene, cleaning their teeth with vine ash, rosemary, and cloths soaked in wine or vinegar. Benedictines emphasized cleanliness before prayer and shared meals, including rinsing the mouth. Franciscans, living in poverty, used simpler methods, often a stick, salt, and chewing herbs. Herbal gardens within abbeys cultivated sage, thyme, hyssop, and mint, not just for seasoning or medicine, but also for rinses and poultices. Books like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a popular medieval health manual, include entire sections on mouth health, written for monks and laypeople alike. One passage reads, "After meals, cleanse the teeth with cloth and rinse the mouth with water and sage. Let not food fester between the teeth, for foulness breeds sickness." Silence was sacred in many monasteries, but bad breath was considered a physical and spiritual disturbance. Clean mouths helped keep holy spaces clean in spirit. Peasants and farmers, folk wisdom and friction. If noblemen had cinnamon sticks and monks had herbal brews, what did the average peasant have? The answer: whatever grew nearby, whatever worked, and whatever tradition taught. Rural oral hygiene depended heavily on local plants, word of mouth, and shared tools. In the countryside, chewing sticks were universal. Charcoal from cooking fires doubled as dental powder. Sage or thyme leaves were chewed, rubbed on gums, or brewed into rinses. Salt mixed with wood ash was used for scrubbing. Cloth rags were passed through the teeth like primitive floss. Grandparents taught children which sticks to chew, which herbs to mash, which twigs to avoid. There was no written knowledge, but generations of folk medicine passed down orally. While tools were crude, coarse diets, think gritty bread, unrefined grains, and fibrous vegetables, acted as natural tooth scrubbers. This is why many medieval skeletons of rural peasants show low rates of decay but severe wear, flat molars, exposed dentin, and occasional abscesses. They didn't suffer cavities like modern sugar eaters, but they endured grinding erosion, cracked teeth, and chronic jaw pain. And still they smiled. Traders, travelers, and urban dwellers. In medieval towns and cities bustling with markets, inns, and guild halls, oral hygiene was a mix of the rural and the refined. Urbanites had access to imported herbs like cloves and cardamom, apothecaries who sold tooth powders and pastes, public bathhouses with grooming services, barbers who offered tooth extraction and breath rinses. Itinerant sellers hawked tooth-cleaning stones and breath powders in town squares. These were often crushed minerals mixed with chalk, mint, or sage. And in a medieval inn, a traveler might be offered a chewing stick or breath cloth along with their supper, especially if sharing a long table. Still, city life brought new risks. Sugared confections from spice markets, Infections from close quarters. Alcohol-heavy diets, which dried the mouth and promoted decay. So while townspeople had more tools, they also had more toothaches. Cross-cultural influences. Islamic and Jewish traditions. Europe's understanding of hygiene was enriched by contact with the Islamic world, especially in southern Spain, Al-Andalus, Sicily, and the Crusader states. Islamic physicians like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and al-Zahrawi wrote extensively about dental hygiene. Their works were translated into Latin and absorbed into European medicine. These texts encouraged daily cleaning with miswak, tooth, sticks from the Salvadora persica tree, rinses made of rosewater, vinegar, and myrrh, avoidance of sweets, especially for children, toothbrushes made of frayed reed or soft wood. Jewish communities, spread across medieval Europe and the Mediterranean, also carried hygienic traditions from ancient sources. Rabbinic law discussed cleaning the body before prayer, and some Jewish physicians recommended toothpicks carved from olive or fig trees, mouth rinses after meals and before morning prayer, avoiding overly hot or cold foods to preserve enamel. These traditions quietly entered broader culture through trade, scholarship, and intercommunity contact. Smiles and stigma. In medieval art, people rarely smile. Was this because teeth were bad? Not necessarily. Smiling broadly in public was often seen as immodest, vulgar, or even sinister. The toothy grin was associated with devils, fools, and drunks. Politeness manuals advised against open laughter, particularly for women. Reserved expressions, soft-spoken words, and modest gestures were ideal. So while tooth care was part of life, teeth were not a point of display, not like today, where whiteness and straightness are signs of status. Medieval people cared more about pain, function, and smell than cosmetics. A mouth that didn't hurt, didn't stink, and didn't bleed was a good one. Between earth and heaven. As the 13th century waned, and the Black Death loomed on the horizon, daily routines like tooth cleaning continued, unnoticed by chroniclers and poets. But they mattered. They marked time, comforted children, soothed pain, and prepared souls for prayer. Clean teeth were not a sign of vanity, they were a form of dignity in a world ruled by hardship, hunger, and faith. So tonight, a merchant in Bologna chews cardamom before bed. A nun in York rinses her mouth with wine and mint. A peasant girl in Brittany rubs salt on her teeth before curling into hay. And as they drift to sleep, they may wonder, in paradise, are teeth always white? Or do even angels carry cloths and sage? The morning sun breaks over the damp thatch roofs of a village in Flanders. A child cries out loud, shrill. Her mother, crouched by the hearth, opens the girl's mouth and sees it, a darkened, swollen lump on the back gum. The tooth is bad, very bad. They have no dentist. They have no painkillers. But they do have tradition and a small set of painful, imperfect tools passed down through generations. In this final section, we explore what happened when medieval oral hygiene failed, when the chewing sticks and salt didn't stop the rot, when pain became unbearable. What did people do when their teeth betrayed them? This is the story of medieval toothaches, tooth extractions, and the early, fumbling rise of something that would one day be called dentistry. The toothache, a universal affliction. It was as feared as it was common. A toothache could ruin days, disrupt prayers, and keep even the hardiest peasant from sleep. Causes included cavities, especially later in the Middle Ages as sugar spread, gum disease, abscesses, infection beneath the tooth or in the jawbone, cracked or worn teeth from hard bread or grit-filled flour, impacted teeth, especially wisdom teeth. But in a world without x-rays or understanding of bacteria, causes were guessed at. Explanations ranged from the natural to the mystical. One persistent belief, inherited from antiquity, was the tooth worm theory. These imagined tiny creatures burrowed into the teeth, causing pain and rot. When the pain stopped, people assumed the worm had gone dormant. This theory appeared in Anglo-Saxon charms, Islamic medical texts, and even Eastern traditions. Remedies often sought to kill or expel the worm, sometimes by smoking the mouth with burning henbane seeds, holding hot coals near the face, rinsing with garlic and vinegar, chanting incantations while touching the sore tooth with iron. These methods sometimes offered relief not because of expelled worms, but because the heat or herbs dulled nerve pain or temporarily reduced swelling. Still, the pain always returned, and when it did, people turned to those who were willing to act. Enter the barber surgeon. In villages and towns alike, barber surgeons were the go-to practitioners for tooth problems. They cut hair, performed bloodletting, lanced boils, pulled teeth. Tooth pulling or extraction was a last resort. It was agonizing, risky, and often fatal if infection set in. The tools were primitive. Dental keys in later periods, resembling a crank with a hook. Tongs or forceps, often the same tools used for blacksmithing or gripping hot metal. Fingers and cloths for gripping and twisting. There was no anesthesia. At best, the patient drank ale or wine until dizzy. Some herbalists recommended opium poppy, belladonna, or mandrake, all dangerous if improperly dosed. One 14th century text advises, wrap the head in cloth soaked in vinegar and mustard, and bid the patient bite upon a leather strap while the tooth is taken. Some patients died from shock. Others developed fatal infections, jawbone necrosis, or blood poisoning, sepsis, neither of which had treatment. Yet for many, the pain of a toothache was worse than the risk. It was not uncommon to see people with missing front teeth, especially among the poor, where access to help came only after suffering. Monks, physicians, and tooth remedies. Clergy with medical training sometimes tried less invasive approaches. In monastic infirmaries, tooth pain might be treated with clove or myrrh oil dabbed on the gum, poultices made of onion, garlic, or fig, rinses of hot wine, salt, or sage, heated needles pressed to the gum, cauterization, prayers, relics, or saints' intercession. Saint Apollonia, martyred by having her teeth broken out, became the patron saint of toothaches. Devotees would pray to her, light candles, or touch her image for relief. From the Golden Legend, a popular medieval hagiography, he that calleth upon Saint Apollonia shall be healed of his tooth pain, and she shall pluck forth the evil from his mouth. In practice, monks might combine spiritual and practical care, offering both prayers and compresses soaked in herbal infusions. Dental disfigurement and stigma. A missing tooth was more than an inconvenience. It affected speech, making certain sounds harder to pronounce. Diet, as tough meats or hard bread became difficult. Appearance, which in court or religious settings could lower one's social standing. Chronic dental issues, abscesses, rotting breath, visibly blackened teeth were shameful, especially for monks, clergy, or the urban middle class. Etiquette manuals advised, do not open the mouth widely in speech, lest foulness be seen. Those with black gums should chew cloves or fennel before courtly company. Wash the mouth ere singing, lest thy brethren recoil. In noble courts, such as in France and Burgundy, those with visibly damaged teeth sometimes wore mouth veils, fine pieces of fabric that hid the lower face while eating or talking. Yet in rural areas, lost teeth were simply a fact of life. By age 40, many laborers had lost at least a few, and pain was endured in silence. When dentistry began. By the late 15th century, particularly in Italian and French cities, we begin to see the earliest signs of dental specialization. Guild records mention practitioners who pull teeth only. Apothecaries sold tooth scrapers and powders. Medical texts began to describe dental anatomy with more precision. In 1498, the first bristle toothbrush was recorded in China, made with hog hair. While these developments did not yet spread widely across Europe, they marked the slow emergence of dentistry as a profession and evolution centuries in the making. For now, in the 13th and 14th centuries, dental care remained an art of persistence, improvisation, and tradition. Death from the mouth. Sadly, many deaths likely began in the mouth. Without antibiotics, a simple abscess could spread to the jawbone, causing osteomyelitis, to the bloodstream, causing septicemia, to the brain, via infected sinuses. But these deaths went unrecorded as tooth-related. Instead, chronic pain, swelling, and fever were folded into general causes like putrid humors or plague. Medieval people did not fully understand the link, but they feared mouth infections, especially those that caused swelling of the face, known ominously in some texts as jaw plague. And yet they endured. Dignity in the details. Despite the pain, the risks, and the rudimentary tools people tried, they cleaned with cloth, they rubbed with salt, they chewed mint, they prayed. They believed that keeping the mouth clean was part of being human, part of being faithful, part of maintaining dignity in a hard world. And in this they were right. Because the history of dental care is not just about floss and fluoride. It is about the quiet resilience of ordinary people who kept trying, even when there was no dentist to call. The last tooth. The fire has long burned out. A man lies on a straw pallet in a stone cell. His jaw is swollen. His tooth is cracked. A monk brings warm wine and whispers a prayer to Saint Apollonia. In the corner, a set of pliers rests beside a blood-stained cloth. Outside, dawn breaks. And somewhere in the monastery garden, sage and hyssop bloom. And as the man clutches his face, he thinks, "Will my teeth be whole again in paradise?" The morning mist still clings to the thatched rooftops as you, a mid-level Han Dynasty tax collector, begin your rounds. It is the year 107 BCE, and the reign of Emperor Wu is at its height. Silk Road trade has begun to flourish. Confucianism is state orthodoxy, and you are one of the many agents tasked with maintaining the empire's most ancient and vital bond, taxation. Your official title is Shuishi, Chinese letter, literally, a tax envoy. Your mission is simple in theory but complex in execution. Collect what is owed, measure what is grown, note who is missing, and do it all without causing a revolt. Because in the Han Empire, taxes are not just about silver or grain. They are a direct line between the peasant's field and the emperor's court. And you are the one who walks that line, ledger in hand. Who was the Han tax collector? Unlike the emperors, generals, or scholars whose names fill the scrolls of Chinese history, tax collectors were often faceless bureaucrats, yet they held enormous influence. You may have come from a landed family that sent its sons into local governance, or you may have risen through the county examination system, memorizing the Analects and the Book of Documents to demonstrate your Confucian discipline. Either way, your appointment is official. You are one of the hundreds, possibly thousands, of civil agents responsible for overseeing taxation at the county, Chinese letter, Xian, level. You answer not to the emperor directly, but to your magistrate, a government official appointed by the imperial court, who oversees law, revenue, conscription, and agriculture in the region. You are expected to be literate in classical Chinese, numerate enough to calculate crop yields and land assessments, familiar with the rituals of state orthodoxy, politically cautious but firm. Your tools: a bamboo tally, an ink stone, a set of wooden tablets, and a mind trained in meticulous repetition. The structure of the Han tax system. To understand your daily duties, you must understand what kinds of taxes you're expected to collect. The Han taxation system combines tradition, pragmatism, and Confucian ideals. It centers on 1. Land tax, Chinese letter. Farmers paid around 1/15 of their crop yield, later raised to 1/10 in grain. You measure this using standardized granaries and bamboo measures. Rice, wheat, and millet are weighed and recorded. 2. Head tax, Chinese letter. Every male over 15 owed an annual tax in cloth, coin, or labor. Sometimes waived in years of famine, but rarely forgiven entirely. Widows and orphans might be exempt or quietly charged anyway. 3. Labor tax, Chinese letter. Instead of coin, peasants might be required to serve a month or more per year on public works building roads, canals, or imperial tombs. You note who has served, who has paid their exemption fee, and who is overdue. 4. Market and trade levies. Merchants paid a portion of their goods, value often 10% at official market stations. Smuggling and underreporting are rampant. Each type of tax has its own form, its own collection method, and its own season. You are expected to know them all. The morning rounds. You rise early, brush your teeth with salt and water, and don your official robes plain but clean. You tie your hair with a top knot, secure your writing implements, and begin your walk toward the village granary. A farmer awaits, cart pulled by oxen. He bows low and gestures toward his sacks of millet. You offer no pleasantries. You weigh the bags, record the amounts, note the household name carved on a wooden tag, and stamp it with a red clay seal. Your assistant loads the grain into the county's granary, its walls lined with stone to deter pests. Then come the complaints. One man claims his field flooded. Another insists his son is too sick for labor service. A widow begs for an exemption. You listen, nod. Sometimes you write notes for your magistrate, but often you simply mark them down as delinquent, knowing that mercy might come from above, but that your job is to record the reality. You move on to household inspections. You compare your tally sheets from the previous year to who still resides in the hamlet. Has anyone left, died, married, reclassified? Children, especially boys, are tallied carefully. In just a few years, they'll be taxed. Tools of the trade. You do not carry coins. You do not carry a sword, but you carry the tools that make the empire work. Scroll wooden or bamboo slips, Chinese letter. Before paper became widespread, most records were kept on narrow, flat slips of bamboo strung together with twine. You use these to record each family's name. Note land sizes, seed loans, and grain owed. Annotate special cases, flooding, plague, exemptions. Fountain pen brush, inkstone, and ink stick. Using a soft hair brush and ink made from pine soot, you write in small, neat characters fitting as much as you can on a single slip. Tally sticks. For market taxes and simple records, you sometimes use a split tally system, a notched stick broken into 2 halves. One half is kept by you, the other by the taxpayer. They fit only if genuine, an early anti-fraud method. These records are then submitted monthly to your magistrate's office, where scribes copy them onto larger registers. The weight of the state. Though your job is administrative, your presence carries real weight. Farmers fear your visits not because you're cruel, but because the state follows behind you. Your ink becomes policy, your records become law. A wrongly recorded land size could mean overtaxation, labor conscription, seizure of land, generational resentment. For this reason, tax collectors are often resented, even feared. Some households hide young sons to avoid the head tax. Others claim poor harvests while hoarding grain. A few attempt bribery, offering chickens, silk scraps, or wine. You accept none, not because you are pure, but because your magistrate is strict and punishments for corruption are severe. Still, you mark certain households discreetly for reinspection. You learn to read body language, storage patterns, and seasonal excuses. Tax in times of trouble. Famine, rebellion, flood. These events complicate your job enormously. If crops fail, peasants may flee to neighboring counties. You are then left with ghost villages, empty homes, unpaid taxes, abandoned fields. You record these, too, hoping that your reports will spare survivors from further burden. But the state rarely waives taxes completely. Instead, it postpones them, adding debt to the next year's tally. In times of war, you might be reassigned to assist with military supply logistics, measuring food requisitions, tracking weapons deliveries, or auditing army camps. Your clerical hand becomes a tool of empire. A pause in the afternoon. You return to your office bare, except for shelves of slips, a low desk, and a worn cushion. Your assistant brings tea and a bowl of boiled grain. You sip quietly, reviewing the morning's records. Outside, children play. Inside, you hold the ledgers of lives: who eats, who serves, who owes. You press your seal into wet clay, finishing the day's record. The seal bears your name, your office, and the date. And as the wax hardens, you wonder, do the farmers think of you as a man, or only as a mark on their grain sacks? The midday sun is high, your ink has dried, your seal has cooled, and yet the work is only half finished. As a tax collector under the Han Dynasty, your duties do not end with collection. They extend into the tangled undergrowth of bureaucratic reporting, dispute management, and imperial compliance. You are not just a bean counter, you are a cog in a vast Confucian machine, one that values order, hierarchy, and continuity above all else. In this section, we explore the unseen afternoon half of your day. The clerical rituals, social tensions, political risks, and quiet calculations that define life as an imperial agent. The Confucian backbone of the Han bureaucracy. By your time, Han China has fully embraced Confucianism as state philosophy. This affects everything from law to education to taxation. Confucius taught that harmony in the state depends on ritual order, Li; rightful relationships, Ren; moral conduct, De. In practical terms, this means taxes must be fair, transparent, and consistent. Officials should act with benevolence but firmness. Everyone from emperor to peasant has a defined role. You are the middleman, not a noble, not a commoner. You are a keeper of ritual order, expected to model rectitude and loyalty. Fail in this, and you risk more than your job. You risk dishonor, demotion, even corporal punishment. The bureaucratic chain. To understand your position, consider the hierarchy above and below you. Above you, district magistrate, Chinese letter, your direct superior, appointed from the capital, oversees judicial and fiscal matters. Commandery governor, Chinese letter, reports to the central ministries, audits your records, sometimes harshly. Ministry of Revenue, Chinese letter, located in Chang'an, the imperial capital, responsible for state income and budgeting. You'll never meet them, but your ledgers pass up the chain to them. Below you, field assistants, local men hired to help survey land or move grain, often illiterate. Messenger clerks run between villages and county seats, carrying slips, seals, and grain counts. Appraisers, specialists who calculate land yield based on soil type, water access, and previous harvests. In theory, all follow Confucian duty. In practice, bribery, error, favoritism, and fatigue color every interaction. The afternoon ledger ritual. Back in your office, you begin copying the morning's numbers into the master slip set. Each entry must include household name, location, village, township, county, type and amount of tax paid, notes on delay, exemption, or special status, signature mark or thumbprint of the taxpayer. Your official seal. Each wooden slip is numbered. Each bundle is tied with string and tagged. You stack them in rows, each representing one hamlet or village. At week's end, these bundles are packed into lacquered boxes for the district archive, with duplicates sent to the commandery governor. There is no room for mistakes. If your tally shows more people than registered, the magistrate accuses you of inventing taxpayers to inflate returns. If it shows less, you may be accused of corruption or worse, treason. Your assistant quietly sharpens the ink brush as you sweat over your characters. Social friction and quiet power. You do not wear armor. You do not carry a weapon, but villagers fear you more than bandits. Why? Because you represent a force that is both inescapable and invisible, the will of the state, encoded in numbers. You can declare a family delinquent, initiate a land dispute inquiry, revoke a tax exemption, refer someone for labor service, recommend leniency or press for penalties. Most of the time, you do not need to exercise these powers. Their mere presence ensures compliance. Yet this also places a weight on you. Everyone you meet watches your behavior. Are you fair? Are you greedy? Do you accept favors? Will you ignore a missing sack of millet if offered a bribe? A single whisper of corruption may follow you for years. Some families invite you to dinner after collection: roast duck, rice wine, candied plums. You accept sometimes, but you document the value in your ledger, lest your magistrate audit you. In a system that survives on paper more than kindness, you trust ink more than friendship. Disputes, disasters, and delay. Occasionally, your day is interrupted by a grievance. My neighbor added a ridge to his land and now claims part of mine. The grain measure was wet. I was cheated. My son died during labor service. I demand exemption. You are no judge, but your records often determine the truth. You check slips from previous years. You verify seals. You look for inconsistencies in handwriting or measurements. In flood years, you document damage with drawings on slips or include broken pottery tagged with the household name. These serve as physical evidence of disaster. But you know the state has limited sympathy. Too many exemption requests, and the magistrate accuses you of negligence. Too few, and the people say you're heartless. You walk a tightrope, measuring both millet and mercy. The role of the granary. Near your office sits the county granary, a squat, well-ventilated structure made of stone and wood. It serves three purposes. Tax storage. Grain collected from the land tax is stored here before redistribution or transfer to the capital. Famine relief. During poor harvests, the state may release emergency stores. You help decide who qualifies. Seed loans. Families may request loans of grain to replant. You record these with interest and collect repayment next harvest. Mismanagement of the granary is a capital offense. Mold, infestation, or theft reflects badly on all involved. You inspect the storeroom personally each week, checking for rot, sealing barrels, and verifying locks. The smell of aged millet follows you everywhere. Corruption, censure, and consequences. Not all tax collectors are honest. In recent years, you've heard of a fellow official padding records to claim greater productivity and pocketing the difference. A field appraiser underestimating a wealthy landlord's estate in exchange for a silk robe. A magistrate quietly exempting his cousin from head tax. Punishments vary. Minor offenses: demotion, loss of salary, forced public apology. Major offenses: canning, imprisonment, exile, or execution. Your own record is clean, but only because you are cautious. Each night, you review your own logs for errors, sealing them with a private mark before copying them for submission. Sometimes, as you close your eyes, you see tally marks glowing behind your eyelids. A sunset of tallies. The sun dips low. Smoke rises from kitchen fires across the village. Children call out. Water buckets slosh. You stretch your legs and walk to the riverbank. You watch the current roll past, smooth and steady. It occurs to you that your work, while uncelebrated, shapes the empire more than any edict. Without your ledgers, soldiers go unpaid, roads go unbuilt, palaces go dark, temples decay. Your brushstrokes are the empire's bloodstream. And as you head home with dust on your robes and the smell of millet in your sleeves, you wonder, will anyone ever carve the name of a tax collector into stone? Or are we remembered only in numbers? The lamp burns low. The final tally is sealed. Outside your small county office, night has fallen over the fields. Somewhere a farmer eats a humble supper. Somewhere else a scholar writes poetry by candlelight. And you sit quietly beside a stack of bamboo slips, reflecting on the quiet weight of ink and grain. This final section traces the broader legacy of your work not just in your lifetime, but in the centuries and empires that followed. The hand tax system was more than a bureaucratic burden. It was a blueprint for governance, one whose echoes can still be found in tax codes, census forms, and statecraft across East Asia. We'll explore how the infrastructure, ethics, and intelligence embedded in your ledgers laid the foundations for China's long imperial legacy. Why taxes mattered so much. To understand your place in history, we must return to a simple idea. The state cannot exist without revenue. But the Han state didn't just collect taxes to sustain itself, it used taxation to integrate distant regions, impose cultural norms, redistribute resources, bind people to bureaucracy. You, the tax collector, were the state's interface, the living embodiment of a centralized government in towns and villages far from the capital. Your grain measurements told the empire who had enough to eat. Your household counts revealed population movement, labor capacity, and military potential. It was in many ways a silent census conducted every year, house by house, field by field. And unlike in some ancient societies, the Han state tried to standardize everything. Weights and measures, writing styles, record formats, fiscal calendars. Also, your report in a frontier town could be read, understood, and audited in Chang'an weeks or even months later. Literacy and power in the Han administration. You were likely among the literate elite even if you weren't born into wealth or prestige. In Han China, literacy was power. A person who could write could gain employment, petition the court, access Confucian texts, ascend in social rank. But writing wasn't just about beauty or intellect, it was about accuracy. Tax records had to be clear, legible, and conforming. If your slips were messy or used incorrect terms, they would be rejected. You might be reprimanded. Your magistrate might be fined. So even the style of your writing was a political act. This focus on clerical competence became a cultural norm. Even long after your time, during the Tang and Song dynasties, the highest government exams still emphasized Confucian classics, but also administrative writing. In a way, the humble documents you produced helped shape the exam system, civil service, and meritocracy that defined imperial China. Rebellion in the records. Of course, not all history is peaceful. At the end of the Western Han, as Emperor Wang Mang attempted sweeping reforms including land redistribution and tax, restructuring the fragile trust between state and people broke. Poor tax enforcement, corruption, and famine helped trigger the Red Eyebrows Rebellion, c. 18 CE, named after the insurgents, ritual of painting their brows red to identify one another. Their anger was not just at the emperor, it was at the bureaucratic machine that taxed them, tracked them, and punished them for failing to produce what nature had not given. Tax collectors became symbols of oppression, Records were burned, officials were executed. The empire fell. It is a sobering reminder that your role, however invisible in peacetime, becomes a target in times of unrest. Tangible traces, what survives? Though your name has long been lost, your work endures in the archaeological record. Excavations across China have revealed bamboo and wooden tax slips, especially in arid regions like Dunhuang. Stamped grain jars, with tally marks indicating tax origin. Official seals used to authenticate documents. Granary records, listing contributions and deficits. Stone inscriptions recording tax regulations or exemptions. In some desert sites, slips bundled in string still lie preserved, the ink as black and sharp as the day you wrote it. Historians today pore over these slips to reconstruct ancient life. How many pigs did a rural household own in 106 BCE? What portion of millet was claimed in a flood year? Which families consistently paid late? How did harvests vary by province? All these questions are answered not by imperial edicts, but by your notes. Bureaucracy beyond borders. Your tax records influenced not only later Chinese dynasties, but also neighboring civilizations. In Korea, during the Goguryeo and Silla periods, states adopted hand-style administrative districts and tax registers. In Japan, the Taika reforms 645 CE directly borrowed Chinese tax models, introducing land surveys, household registries, taxation in kind, grain, cloth, labor. Even in Vietnam, hand tax systems shaped early court structures and village administration for centuries. Your daily ritual writing a family's land size on a bamboo slip was not just local. It became part of an East Asian tradition of bureaucratic governance that outlasted dynasties and borders. The ethical burden. Confucianism teaches that an official must act with Ren benevolence and Li ritual propriety. But life, as you know, is more complicated. Each decision you make is a moral test. Do you record the widow's small rice harvest as insufficient and spare her the tax? Do you mark the landowner's expansion honestly, even though he is connected? Do you note the missing son in the labor roster, or let the family hide him? These choices will never be praised in court, but they matter. Every tally is a judgment, and your pen is a quiet scale. This is the unspoken truth of hand bureaucracy. It rests not only on laws, but on the personal ethics of thousands of local officials, each deciding how closely to follow or bend the rules. In this way, your conscience is the final check in the system. A last look at the ledgers. As night deepens, you close the lacquer box of slips, tie the string, and press your official seal into red wax. Your assistant snores softly in the corner, a candle flickers, the wooden walls creak in the wind. Tomorrow you will begin again, measuring grain, listening to disputes, counting heads, and hopping the river does flood. You are one among many. Your name will not be written in the chronicles. You will not appear in portraits, but your work shapes everything. And perhaps, as you drift to sleep on your mat, you wonder, does the emperor ever read the names we write, or only the numbers? The morning air inside the great palace of Constantinople carries a faint scent of wax, ink, and parchment. It is the year 945 CE. Basil I's Macedonian dynasty still holds firm, and the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire is at one of its bureaucratic peaks. War, diplomacy, trade, and taxation flow through a single point of contact, the parchment-stained desks of imperial scribes. You are one of them, a chartularios, a middle-ranking clerk in the vast administrative machinery of the Byzantine state. Neither noble nor soldier, your realm is the written word, and your daily burden is as heavy as the scrolls stacked around you. Who were the Byzantine bureaucrats? Contrary to the popular images of glittering emperors and helmeted soldiers, most of the Byzantine Empire functioned through a labyrinthine bureaucracy that rivaled anything the Romans had invented. It was paperwork, not swords, that truly ran the empire. Bureaucrats like you came from educated, mostly urban families, rarely noble, but sometimes wealthy. To become a chartularios, you likely studied Greek grammar and rhetoric as a child, learned basic legal and fiscal principles from tutors or local monks, entered service through connections or patronage, passed written examinations on court protocol, document forms, and imperial decrees. Your official title, chartularios, chi alpha rho tau omicron upsilon lambda alpha rho ode omicron sigma, literally means keeper of papers. Depending on your department, you might be involved in drafting imperial edicts, recording land grants, managing naval supply accounts, preparing court ceremony scripts, tracking provincial tax flows. In your case, you serve in the Sekretan of the Genicon, the empire's financial secretariat. Your office is modest, your duties immense, and your ink-stained hands are the quiet heartbeat of an empire. The physical space of bureaucracy. Your day begins in the Balcolian complex, a cluster of government buildings just south of the palace walls. You pass under marble arches, nodding to fellow scribes and pages, your robe modest but clean, dyed deep brown, with a colored sash denoting your department. Your workspace is Spartan. A low desk made of walnut wood, a sand tray for blotting ink, a set of reed pens, calamos, several ink pots, each filled with black, red, or green pigment depending on the document type, shelves filled with scrolls, codices, and leather-bound accounts, a wax tablet for drafting before committing to parchment. Atop your desk lies the work of the day: 2 petitions from provincial landowners, 1 imperial order to be duplicated, and a report of missing tax grain from Thessaloniki. You roll up your sleeves and begin. Language and format, writing for the empire. In the Byzantine world, form mattered as much as content. Every document followed strict linguistic and visual conventions. You write in medieval Greek, using heavily formulaic openings and closings. An imperial order prostagma might begin with, "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, our God, and by the grace of our most pious and God-crowned emperor." A tax receipt might read, "The overseer of the themes acknowledges the delivery of grain in accordance with the fiscal year numbered." There is no room for improvisation. A single incorrect phrase may invalidate the document. Punctuation is minimal. Abbreviations abound. Much of the communication relies on shared cultural and bureaucratic assumptions. But more than words, you must understand formulas, legal templates that tie your scroll to centuries of precedent. Departments within departments. The Byzantine bureaucracy is layered like an onion. You work in the Genicon, but your tasks might involve coordination with the Logothesian II Dramo, managing imperial communications and intelligence; the Sacalian, the treasury proper; the Notarian, handling judicial records and wills; the Chartophylakian, the central archive. Each office maintains its own scripts, staff hierarchy, seals, and storage system. Your supervisor, a higher-ranking official known as a logothetes, assigns tasks in batches. Today you must draft a response to a complaint from an Anatolian farmer who says his tax payment was misrecorded, a confirmation that a widow's estate has been correctly assessed by the theme province, a digest of receipts for wine duties collected in Bithynia. These will be reviewed, corrected, and finally signed by the appropriate authority, often weeks after you've written them. Bureaucratic tools of the trade. Though your world is one of words, you rely on physical tools as much as any soldier. Writing reed pens and ink. Calamos pens cut from river reeds. ink made from oak gall, iron salts, and gum arabic. Red ink reserved for imperial signatures. Gold ink used only for crucibles, gold-sealed imperial charters. Scroll writing surfaces. Parchment animal skin for long-term records. Papyrus, increasingly rare but still used for drafts. Wax tablets for quick notes or drafts. Paper, newly introduced via Arab traders, rare, expensive, and mostly used in the East. Locked with key seals. Each office uses lead bully stamped with its own emblem. These are attached via strings to official documents. The emperor's crucible carries a gold seal, hence the name. Before a document leaves your desk, it must be witnessed, dated, stamped, and tied. Social dynamics, status, patronage, and tedium. Though not glamorous, your job holds real power, especially over those who need favors from the state. Landowners need charters, merchants need licenses, monasteries need tax exemptions. All of them must pass through your office. Bribes are illegal but common. A basket of figs, a silver coin, a whispered promise of support for a nephew's promotion. You accept nothing openly, you record everything carefully. But the system itself is shaped by patronage. Powerful figures, military generals, patriarchs, eunuchs can override your work with a nod from the right superior. Still, your documents are the first line of imperial administration, and errors reflect poorly on everyone. So you write with care. Every word, every stroke, is a representation of imperial legitimacy. The quiet weight of continuity. As the day drags on, your fingers cramp, your back aches, the sand tray is streaked with black dust. But you continue page after page, scroll after scroll. Because beneath your ink lies something greater, the survival of an ancient empire in a changing world. Barbarians may raid the border, Arab fleets may menace the Aegean, Slavic tribes may rebel. But as long as you draft decrees, reconcile grain counts, and preserve imperial format, the empire still lives. Byzantium survives not because of swords, but because of scripts. And as the sun sets and the candles flicker in the stone office walls, you pause. Do the people outside these walls ever think of the clerks who keep the empire intact? Or do they only see the emperor's golden seal? By mid-morning the next day, your back is sore and your eyes are already strained. Another day of ledgers, decrees, audits, and annotations has begun. But the weariness is not just physical, it is political. For while your job may seem like a quiet one, reconciling figures, cross-referencing scrolls, and sealing parchments, the reality is far more delicate. Every word you write, every line you copy, every figure you confirm can shift reputations, empower enemies, or draw imperial attention. In this section, we go deeper into the dynamics of risk and responsibility that define life as a Byzantine clerk, from clerical rivalries and imperial suspicion to ceremonial pageantry and record-keeping during crisis. The politics of paper. Unlike soldiers or merchants, your battles are fought with phrases and protocols. A single clerical entry may confirm a general's land grant, document a bishop's failure to remit dues, justify the reassignment of a provincial governor, validate an exemption that cost the treasury thousands of solidi. Your reports are read not just by superiors, but occasionally by the emperor himself or his eunuch advisors. A misplaced term or unauthorized edit could lead to public reprimand, docked wages, reassignment to a remote post, or in rare cases, blinding or exile for perceived disloyalty. You must walk a tightrope, precise but not provocative, accurate but politically aware. You draft with care, knowing your words can ripple through ministries and monasteries alike. Internal rivalries, secreta and the scribe wars. The Byzantine state was divided into numerous secreta, administrative departments, each jealously guarding its privileges. The Genican handles taxation and finance. The Dromos handles intelligence and diplomatic correspondence. The Sacalian tracks the treasury's internal flows. And the Idacan oversees imperial properties and gifts. Each department has its own chartularioi clerks, nodarioi notaries, and logotheti senior secretaries. Rivalries between these offices can become heated. Competing interpretations of tax law, overlapping jurisdictions on estate ownership, duplicate registries that contradict each other. You once spent 3 full days reconciling the Genican's grain count with that of the Idacan, only to discover that the issue stemmed from a misstated seal on a tax exemption granted 3 emperors ago. No one apologized, but your reputation for detail quietly grew. Such moments, while tedious, build your name among your peers, a form of bureaucratic capital more valuable than coin. Bureaucracy during crisis. When peace reigns, your job is methodical. But during war, famine, or internal rebellion, your desk becomes a crisis hub. In the summer of 941, for example, when the Rus navy attempted to raid Constantinople, the capital went on lockdown. Military scribes recorded ship deployments. Food officials requisitioned grain from monasteries. You were tasked with documenting emergency tax credits for coastal villages, loans to military families whose farmland was flooded, redistribution of surplus from imperial granaries. In normal times, such records are triple-checked and sealed. During crisis, you must write fast, relying on abbreviated forms and oral confirmations. Errors are inevitable, accountability delayed. But weeks later, once the threat passed, the audit began. Every crisis record was reopened. Any discrepancy, no matter how understandable in the moment, was questioned. Some clerks were reassigned. One was demoted. You were spared, thanks to your habit of keeping coded margin notes on a wax tablet enough to reconstruct the logic of your decisions. In Byzantium, even chaos has paperwork. The theater of documentation, ceremonial record-keeping. It would be wrong to think of your work as purely clerical. Much of it is ceremonial, designed not just to record, but to symbolize imperial order. Major decrees are delivered in grand rituals. Clerks in colored robes carry scrolls on silver trays. The emperor sits upon a jeweled throne. The patriarch offers a blessing. Witnesses stand by, dressed in stiff silk. You once had the honor of presenting a charter to a monastery on Mount Athos. You knelt. You recited the preamble. You held the imperial seal aloft before placing it onto the golden wax. The abbot kissed the document and bowed. Afterward, you return to your desk to tally wine receipts. The grandeur fades quickly. But such rituals serve a deeper purpose. They reinforce the idea that even the smallest bit of paperwork is touched by divine and imperial will. Errors and their consequences. You've made mistakes, everyone has. A missing prefix on a tax decree led to 2 families being doubly taxed. A clerk's ink blot made a merchant's name unreadable. His shipment was impounded. A misaligned seal left a land grant legally invalid until the emperor reissued it. Some errors are caught early. Others lie dormant, only to resurface years later when a monastery appeals or a military commander is audited. If you catch your own mistake early, you may correct it quietly, noting the correction in the registry margin. But if your superior catches it first, the correction must be formalized through a decree of amendment, a small but permanent blemish on your career record. Yet for all the danger, the greater fear is forgery. Forgery and falsification. The Byzantine world reveres documents, but also fears false ones. The rise of falsified charters, especially by ambitious monasteries, has created a subspecialty within your ranks: verification. You are sometimes asked to inspect suspicious documents for inconsistent ink formulas, seals with outdated iconography, unusual abbreviations, date formats that don't match the issuing reign. In one case, a false grant had been inserted into a monastery's archive, claiming tax exemption backdated by 40 years. You proved it false by noting that the seal bore a cross style not introduced until a later emperor. The case earned you favor, but it also made you enemies monks who might otherwise have sent you offerings now eye you warily. Even truth-telling has political cost. The scribe's inner life. Your life is quiet mostly. You rise before sunrise. You review your ink and sand. You take dictation, revise scrolls, and catalog receipts. You eat at your desk olives, bread, a fig, perhaps a bit of salted fish. You might share gossip with another clerk, who's fallen from favor, which monastery sent rosewater with their latest grant, what the eunuchs are whispering in the halls. But your true work is interpretive. You translate law into language. You convert imperial will into words. You encode wealth into numbers. You reduce villages, families, conflicts, and deaths into tidy lines of script. And when you go home, your fingers stained with ink, your eyes dry and tired, you wonder, are we clerks recording the empire, or inventing it as we go? The candle is almost out. You tilt the inkwell to gather the last drop. Tomorrow, a new batch of scrolls will arrive, requests for pensions, reports from the provinces, the occasional imperial edict to be copied with red ink and reverence. But tonight you pause, because behind the parchments and protocols lies something larger, the shape of empire held together not by the sword, nor even the cross, but by the written word. In this final section, we explore what your records truly meant then, now, and for centuries to come. What does it mean to govern through documents? What does it mean to be a person whose hand is remembered only in abbreviations and margins? The machinery of memory. The Byzantine Empire lasted for over 1,000 years. That longevity is due not only to diplomacy, theology, or fortifications, but also to a fanatical devotion to records. Every grant, decree, exemption, and punishment, no matter how minor, was written, copied, archived, and preserved. Even when regions fell to foreign invasion, the Central Archive often retained the only surviving memory of land boundaries, debts, and family lines. Your job, then, was not just to write the present. You wrote the past into permanence. Without your scrolls, disputes over land could not be resolved. Heirs could not inherit. Soldiers could not prove their pay. Merchants could not reclaim confiscated goods. Monasteries could not claim exemption. In many ways, you were the empire's memory, even as you faded from its stories. Byzantium's archival obsession. Byzantine administrators developed some of the most sophisticated archival systems in the pre-modern world. Scrolls and codices were tagged with string tabs, labeled with subject and date, stored in pigeonhole-style wall shelves, similar to Roman tabularia, indexed by department, emperor's reign, province, and topic, duplicated in triplicate for use in the field, central offices and archives. The Great Chartophylakion of Constantinople, housed within the patriarchal compound, contained thousands of documents spanning generations. Imperial scribes even developed document registries that listed every scroll received and sent, with dates, contents, and responsible clerks recorded. It was, in effect, a medieval metadata system. And while earthquakes and fires destroyed much over the centuries, some copies survived in monasteries like Mount Athos or St. Catherine. In Sinai, libraries of papyrus and parchment, silently preserving the bureaucratic voice of Byzantium. Legacy beyond the empire. Your influence didn't end with Byzantium's borders. As the empire interacted with Slavic kingdoms, the Islamic caliphates, and Western European states, your documents became templates. In the Slavic world, the Kievan Rus, modeled their own chancery systems on Byzantine formats. Bulgarian and Serbian states adopted Greek document styles and titles. In the Islamic world, Arab administrators studied Greek bureaucratic methods after conquering Byzantine territories. Terms like diwan, bureau, may have absorbed procedural aspects from Byzantine offices. In Western Europe, the Holy Roman Empire mimicked the ceremonial language and structure of Byzantine decrees. Charlemagne styled himself as Emperor of the Romans, borrowing the symbolic weight your documents carried. Even centuries after the fall of Constantinople, scholars and scribes looked to your scrolls for precedent and structure. Human hands behind the handwriting. Historians today study your work through surviving sigillographic evidence, seals; paleography, the study of handwriting; dated formulas and terminologies; scribal notations and abbreviations. They often cannot name you, but they can sometimes recognize your hand. A certain flourish on the Greek letter beta. A cramped style used to save parchment. A preference for specific date formats. Some scribes, writing on behalf of imperial secretaries, began inserting tiny monograms or hidden marks, perhaps a private thrill of knowing they would endure, even if anonymously. A signature without a name, a legacy without fame. Fragile permanence. For all the empire's durability, you know that documents are fragile. Ink fades. Scrolls mold. Wax seals crack. Mice chew through centuries of law. Fire and water erase lives in seconds. And yet Byzantium persisted. Because every morning clerks like you showed up, mixed their ink, trimmed their reeds, and copied the law again and again and again. You never stopped writing, that was the secret. Even after war, even after regime change, even when emperors fell and palaces burned, someone always sat down and started a new page. It was bureaucracy, not bloodlines, that kept Byzantium alive. The scribe as citizen. Your life is not dramatic. You don't ride into battle or shape theology. But in your silence, you offer something profound: continuity. You serve a state that exists in layers of precedent, and each document you write becomes a new tile in the mosaic. Perhaps that is your true power, not authority over others, but over time. You reduce the chaos of events into structured scrolls. You transform impermanence into policy. You create meaning through format. As a scribe, you are both tool and creator, servant and artisan. Nightfall in the secreta. The lamps flicker low. The marble hallways are quiet. Only the occasional cough or shuffle from another office reminds you that others, too, labor late. You stack your documents neatly, tie them with red twine, and lock them in your department's wooden archive chest. Tomorrow more scrolls will come, more disputes, more edicts, more errands from people you will never meet. But for now, the city sleeps. And as you step into the starlit courtyard, your feet echoing against ancient stone, you pause and wonder. Did Rome ever imagine that its true heirs would be men with pens? You wake to the low, rhythmic clatter of wood on stone. Outside your timber-framed house, the undershot wheel of the village mill turns slowly in the dawn light. The river flows steadily this morning, a blessing. Too little rain and the wheel stalls. Too much, and it washes out the sluice gates again. You are a millwright, and this is your world. Not the lord's halls or the monk's cloisters, but the noisy, muddy, and vital heart of medieval technology, the gristmill. The mill as a medieval engine. In modern times, we think of mills as rustic or scenic. But in 11th century Europe, the mill is power itself economically, socially, and politically. Mills grind grain. Grain feeds people. And so the control of water, wheels, and flour touches every life in the manor. As a millwright, you are not a noble or priest, but you are no mere peasant either. You are one of the few who understands. how to set gears and align axles, how to divert water using sluices and leats, how to maintain bearings and balance millstones, how to construct, reinforce, or repair the mill structure itself. Your hands shape the very infrastructure of survival. Location, location, location. Your mill stands at a slight bend in the river chosen for its steady flow and gentle gradient. The setup includes a weir upstream to dam and redirect water, a mill race, a narrow channel to drive the wheel, a sluice gate for controlling flow, a wooden undershot wheel powered by flowing water from beneath, a mill house where the grindstones reside, a grain loft for storage above. Inside the mill house, 2 millstones, a stationary bedstone, and a rotating runner stone grind the grain into flour. You listen to the stone song daily, ears tuned to subtle shifts in tone that might mean worn teeth on a gear, imbalanced stone surfaces, damp grain clogging the chute. Each creak, hiss, or clunk is a kind of language, and you're one of the few who speaks it fluently. Lord labor and the right to grind. You may own the tools of your trade, but the mill itself is not yours. It belongs to the lord of the manor, who claims what is known as the banal right, the right to require peasants to grind their grain at his mill for a fee. This mill monopoly is a cornerstone of rural feudal life. Peasants cannot legally hand grind their own grain. Those caught using hand querns may face fines or confiscation. The miller collects tolls, usually a fixed portion, like 1/16 of the flour produced. This creates tension. Peasants resent the forced toll and suspect the miller, sometimes correctly, of taking more than his due. As the millwright, you exist in the middle, a skilled craftsman beholden to the lord but working closely with the people. Your reputation matters. Too close to the lord, and villagers stop trusting you. Too independent, and you risk your position or worse, accusations of disloyalty. You've learned to navigate with care, fixing what breaks, smoothing complaints, and never, ever being seen to take more flour than the rules allow. Building a wheel. When the wheel broke last winter, you spent 2 weeks rebuilding it. You had to. Fell a suitable oak, seasoned and knot-free. Cut spokes and rims by hand using a frame saw. Shape paddles with an adze. Fit the axle, balancing weight and resistance. Caulk all seams with pitch and moss. Reinforce the supports with iron brackets, brought at cost from the blacksmith. It was a task of precision, done with few tools, no blueprints, and under pressure. Grain had backed up, villagers were hungry, and the lord was watching. When it finally turned again, there was no celebration, just the sigh of sacks being lifted and the rhythm of stones resuming their grind. But you felt it, a quiet pride in a thing done well. Tools of the trade. As a medieval millwright, you carry a small but essential toolkit. Mallet and chisel for stone and timber. Adze and drawknife for shaping beams. Auger to bore axle holes. Plumb line and square for alignment. Wedges to lift and separate stones. Grease cloth for lubricating gears. Pitch pot to seal against leaks. You also carry mental tools, inherited tricks from older millwrights, half-remembered rules of thumb, and a keen sense for flow, friction, and force. Unlike modern engineers, you cannot read or write, but you can read a river, and that's what matters. Millstones and maintenance. Your millstones, made of French burstone, are your most valuable component. Imported, expensive, and prone to wear, they must be. Redressed every few months by pecking new grooves, called furrows. Checked for balance. Dried regularly to prevent mold. Guarded from thieves and frost alike. You remember when the runner stone cracked, half a season's income gone in a heartbeat. The lord raged, the mill stopped, and you spent days in penance, although you had warned of the cold snap. A stone is not just a rock. It's a delicate machine, and one bad harvest away from ruin. The social life of the mill. The mill is more than a place of work. It is a social node. Villagers gather while waiting for grain. Children splash near the sluice gate. Lovers meet under the loft's eaves. News, rumors, and complaints flow with the flour. You hear it all from marriage plans, to local grievances, to whispers of rebellion in nearby towns. Sometimes monks arrive from a distant abbey, requesting to grind their own grain. Other times, the reeve brings a new law or summons a tenant for court. And once a year, the mill is blessed by the local priest, who sprinkles holy water on the wheel and prays for the grain to flow. You stand quietly nearby, hands folded, watching the droplets roll down oak beams you shaped. The cost of the current. Water, though natural, is not free. Floods damage your foundations. Ice jams split your supports. Droughts make the wheel idle. And rivals, especially monasteries, sometimes redirect streams to their own mills, starting what some call the mill wars. You once had to negotiate with a neighboring village whose monks diverted a stream feeding your weir. The Lord sent a knight. The monks sent scripture. You brought your tools and quietly redug the trench overnight. No one thanked you, but the water returned. As the sun dips low and the wheel groans into its evening rhythm, you rest against the mill wall and wipe the grit from your palms. The river flows as it always has. But you wonder, will the Lord still control the wheel in 100 years? Or will the villagers one day grind their own bread? You've just replaced a split timber in the wheel axle, but your mind is elsewhere. The mood in the village has shifted. The reeve, the local official for the Lord, has been making rounds more often. The bailiff came through last week with a scribe, something to do with new toll assessments, and the local priest, usually quiet, mentioned complaints in the manor court about mill injustice. You've seen this before. When people grow restless, the mill becomes a flashpoint. This section explores the growing tensions around medieval mills between peasants and lords, between millers and villagers, between monastic rivals and lay authorities. It also looks at the risks of sabotage, the use of mills for surveillance, and the beginnings of technological shifts that may soon make your tools and your loyalties more complicated. The toll that grinds too hard. Tolling grain is nothing new. The Lord claims a portion for the privilege of using his mill, typically 1/16 of the flour milled. But in recent years, several lords across the region have begun increasing that portion, sometimes as high as 1/12 or 1/10. They cite maintenance costs, repairs, or new regulations, but everyone knows it's about revenue. The villagers grow suspicious. They accuse the miller of keeping a larger share than owed, perhaps using a false bottom in the flour box, or slightly adjusting the stone spacing so that more flour sticks and is later scraped into a separate sack. You've heard the whispers. He steals a spoonful from every sack. He built a second chute under the floor. His wife bakes cakes with our flour. Whether true or not, the accusations fall on the entire mill operation, including you. You don't run the tolls, but you design the chute. You balance the wheel. Your fingerprints are on the gears. So when the villagers are angry, you feel it first. Millers, mistrust, and morality. In medieval literature, the miller is often a stock villain, greedy, crude, and dishonest. Chaucer's miller in the Canterbury Tales is a braggart and a cheat. In Fabliau's French comic Tales, millers are constantly tricking or being tricked. Church sermons warn against usurious millers who tamper with God's bounty. But reality is more nuanced. The miller is often literate, numerate, and paid a modest wage by the Lord, but expected to maintain the mill, collect tolls, and account for grain quantities accurately. The temptation to skim a little off the top is real, especially when winter is long and the Lord's taxes unrelenting. You've known honest millers who worked tirelessly. You've also known one who was hanged after being caught with double-marked sacks. The lesson is clear: trust is rare and scrutiny is constant. Mill as surveillance. What few admit aloud is that the mill isn't just a workplace, it's a monitoring station. Who brings grain early or late? Who brings less than expected? Who whispers while they wait? Who avoids the toll altogether? The miller reports patterns to the reeve reports to the Lord. Sometimes the priest listens too. In this way, the mill becomes a political node. Rebellion often brews here first. Grain hoarding is spotted here. Population changes, marriages, deaths, hunger are observed in real time. You know more than you let on. You keep your eyes down, your ears open, and your hands busy. Because knowing too much, or being known to know too much, can be dangerous. Sabotage and silent revolt. Anger doesn't always come in the form of words. When resentment simmers too long, people act. A villager might throw a dead pig into the sluice to block the flow. Children might sneak in and loosen a gear just enough to cause damage. Stones might be chipped at night with iron bars, weakening them gradually. You've seen it happen. One autumn you found the sluice gate hacked open. Grain was ruined by flood. The miller claimed he'd seen someone in a hooded cloak. The bailiff beat 3 villagers for information. No one confessed. You suspect it was a message, not an accident. You repaired the gate with heavier hinges and an iron pin. Quietly, you said nothing. The rise of monastic mills. Meanwhile, a new challenge is brewing: competition. Several miles downstream, a monastery is building a mill of its own. You've heard rumors. They've hired stoneworkers from the city, and they're importing overshot wheel designs from the Alps. An overshot wheel, where water pours from above rather than rushing beneath, is more efficient, especially in hilly terrain. It uses gravity and can operate with less water volume. This could mean faster grinding, finer flour, lower tolls or none at all, since monks often offer charity milling to locals. The Lord is furious. He's petitioned the bishop to block the monastery's project, citing feudal rights. The monks respond with papal bulls and canonical exemptions. You are caught in the middle. The Lord wants you to spy on the new mill. The monks want to hire you away. You nod politely to both and keep your head down, but you can't stop wondering. What happens when power shifts from the manor to the abbey? Water rights and legal battles. Mill disputes have filled court rolls for centuries. In Normandy, in the 11th century, records show dozens of cases where one village diverted water illegally. 2 mills fought over overlapping races. A miller accused another of stealing flow during night hours. Peasants brought grain to a cheaper mill across the river and were fined. These aren't minor squabbles. They're the bones of local politics. Millwrights are sometimes called as expert witnesses in court, asked to testify about flow rates, seasonal changes, or the legality of sluice gate placement. You once gave such testimony nervously, hat in hand, before a manor court. You described the curve of the river, the weir angle, the likely snowmelt pattern. The steward nodded, the villagers muttered. You were paid a hen, and not everyone spoke to you for a week after. Innovation versus tradition. You've begun experimenting with your own designs. A smaller auxiliary wheel for dry seasons. A new gear ratio to improve stone speed. A removable chute cover to ease cleaning. But change is viewed with suspicion. If it was good enough for my grandfather, it's good enough now, says the reeve. Yet you've seen other millwrights, ones with silver pins on their belts, try new ideas with great success. One even built a windmill, though everyone thought him mad. Maybe that's your future too. Not just maintaining what exists, but imagining what could be built better. Night falls. You return to your cottage, tired from both labor and thought. The river sings its eternal lullaby, flowing past darkened grain sacks and sleeping fields. And as you drift off to sleep, you wonder, will your wheel still turn a century from now? Or will it be replaced by another wheel, another rule, another power entirely? The mill is still for once. The wheel creaks but doesn't turn. Frost along the mill race has frozen the flow. You step inside the stone-walled mill house and light a small oil lamp. Dust hangs in the cold air. The scent of damp grain and worn oak fills your nostrils. There's no grinding today, but still you come. Because the mill is more than a job, it is a monument to the quiet survival of communities. As we conclude the story of the medieval millwright, we look beyond daily tensions into the legacy, the transformations, and the hidden significance of your craft. Because while kings made laws and knights won battles, it was your hands that kept people fed. The pulse of feudal economy. In many medieval villages, the mill was the only place where water was mechanized. It was the single source of mechanical power for miles. It transformed human effort into automated labor. It replaced days of hand grinding with an hour at the grindstones. It allowed grain surpluses to be milled efficiently, enabling trade. It supported breweries, bakeries, and markets. In this way, the mill was not merely a convenience, it was an engine of economic possibility. More flour meant more bread. More bread meant more people could survive winter. And that survival could lead to prosperity, innovation, and even population growth. Without the mill, progress would stall literally and figuratively. Millwrights as engineers of empire. By the 13th century, millwrights were in demand across Europe. Your kind traveled between regions, sometimes secretly hired across enemy lines. You were granted wages, rare freedoms from labor dues, and in some cases land exemptions, simply for being the only person who could build or maintain a wheel. Some millwrights were summoned to construct massive monastic mills with multi-stone chambers, design flour processing complexes with sifters and conveyors, build river locks to stabilize flows and enhance wheel output, transition older water wheels to gear-driven shaft systems. Your tools were simple, but your understanding of force, flow, and load was generations ahead of your time. In a world that barely knew geometry, you were doing practical physics. And yet, you remained unnamed in most records. Your work survived, you did not. The technological tipping point. By the late medieval period, mills were no longer just for flour. Water power began driving. Trip hammers for metal working, textile fulling mills for cloth production, wood saws for construction beams, bellows for blast furnaces. Each adaptation extended your legacy. And in the 14th and 15th centuries, windmills gained ground in flatter regions. They offered freedom from rivers, droughts, and feudal water rights. This shifted the power dynamic. Monasteries and merchant guilds invested in mills. Independent millwrights became consultants and contractors. Some lords lost their monopolies. Some villagers built illicit mills hidden in forests or valleys. The monopoly over the mill and by extension, the people began to crack. Your humble gear was, unknowingly, an agent of decentralization. The millwright's daughter. Not all of your legacy is made of wood and water. You've taught your daughter the craft, not openly, of course. The reeve wouldn't approve, but she listens, she watches, she remembers. She knows how to listen to the gear teeth, how to trace flow pressure by the sound of sluice hiss, how to read the moisture in the grain bin with just a handful. She sketches wheels with chalk on slate, and once she suggested a fix to the hopper chute that even you hadn't considered. You said nothing at the time, but you quietly built it. It worked. You wonder, could a woman ever be a millwright? Would the world allow it? Maybe not now, but someday. And perhaps someday, The people who build the future's wheels will not look like the ones who built the old ones. Echoes in the archives. Today, your name is not found in books. No statue bears your face, but medieval court rolls and manorial surveys hold quiet traces of your labor. Mill rebuilt after the frost, 1342. Sluice rechanneled by special workmen, 1297. Mill turned twice as fast after the new wheel built, 1381. Stone replaced by foreign-trained engineer, 1320. Complaint of sabotage millwright called to inspect. These aren't epics, they're footnotes, but they matter. Because beneath the ink is a life spent shaping motion, harnessing water, feeding others, surviving politics, and turning unseen innovation into community sustenance. Your job didn't make headlines, but it kept thousands alive. A reflection by the wheel. You step outside again. The frost is beginning to melt. Water drips from the weir and gurgles into the narrow mill race. You know what must be done. Check the stone bearings for cracks. Inspect the gears for frost swelling. Clean the chutes. Adjust the sluice gate when the thaw quickens. It will take hours. No one will thank you, but you'll do it anyway. Because this is the world you've shaped, a world that turns on quiet labor. And perhaps one day, when cities rise and machines roar and water wheels turn no more, someone will wonder, who first turned water into power? And the answer, lost in history's eddies, will whisper. A millwright in a muddy village with frost on his boots and sawdust in his hair,